So if you could first introduce yourself and your role within the UNHCR representation in Bulgaria.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Emiliya Bratanova van Harten. I'm Integration Associate here at the UNHCR office in Bulgaria. And that means that I'm working towards the establishment of a functioning integration mechanism in our country that would guarantee access to rights in different integration sectors for asylum seekers and mostly beneficiaries of international protection. I believe that if you need more details, you ask me additional questions.
So obviously not all UNHCR regions are the same in terms of their focus. So could you discuss your unique region and how that affects your main mission and focus separate from the other regions of the UNHCR and other organizations?
Yes, if you want, first my colleague will introduce herself as well.
Oh, okay.
Hello. Yes, this is Iva. Well, I'm a senior protection assistant, focusing also on integration. So with Emiliya, we work together. And of course, we help each other in advocacy activities, but also I work in the field, trying to reach out to the community, doing monitoring visits to the reception centers and to other important places where refugees work, study, or live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, you see that currently at this interview, it is mostly the integration unit that is represented, but I know that you're interested in other areas of our work, of the work of our office. So to get back to your second question, basically the specificity about the mandate of our office here in Bulgaria is related to the fact that Bulgaria is a EU member state. And I know that you have already spoken to other offices in Europe, so you may be aware that our mandate is a little bit more limited than compared to what we do in other countries or the so-called third countries. So what is specific to our region, not so much to our country, is first of all that in addition to the international asylum law, there is regional, and I mean here European asylum system, which also has a direct effect to the Bulgarian legislation. And of course you have the national legislation, so there are more layers of law. And our main mandate is to monitor the implementation of all the levels of law related to the protection of refugees in Bulgaria. And how does that work? Eva already mentioned the monitoring visits. We monitor the way the government functions when it comes to protection and integration, but in addition to that, logically we provide support to the government so that it is able to comply with its international and European obligations in the area of asylum. That works through the provision of different capacity building events, for example, but also through funding of non-governmental organizations that work in the field, and they provide direct assistance. So what is more specific to our region is that our offices are so-called advocacy operations, unlike other offices, as I mentioned, in non-EU member states, which offer more direct support.
And more specifically to the office in Bulgaria, I was doing some research on the UNHCR website for your region, and it mentions that some of the UNHCR Bulgaria projects, such as the asylum system quality assurance and the evaluation mechanism and the further developing asylum quality project, were some important aspects of the UNHCR Bulgaria. And I was wondering if you could speak about some of the purpose of these projects and what their impacts were on the refugees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is, let's say, a difficult question because, first of all, we are talking about past projects. And second of all, usually such projects that are quite big are regional projects, and Bulgaria and other countries from the region have been selected as participating countries. So let's say it's difficult to talk about effects, because then I would believe it would be better suited to talk to the regional office, as they have the overview. Personally, I haven't been part of the implementation of these projects that you mentioned. I can talk more about the integration evaluation tool project. That was also a similar regional project. And if we have to talk about the effects of such big projects, what one can say is for sure that there is a lot of point to engage in such activities, because first of all, these projects are related to some analysis of the situation, and then they develop some tools and guidelines that remain after the project. And if during the project, let's say, for example, the State Agency for Refugees, which is the main asylum institution in Bulgaria, has been involved, which was the case in the quality assurance project, then that means that there is some sustainability with regard to the outcome of the project. So if we have to talk about this project, we know that as part of the project and after it, the State Agency for Refugees created a special unit for quality assurance, and that is still functioning. Of course, it is more difficult to measure the impact of the project during or through individual experiences of refugees and asylum seekers, because then again, it's difficult to measure before and after, since we're talking about different people. So it doesn't work like that. So what matters during such projects is that they establish some system that first of all is piloted, so it is tested for a specific period of time to see how it works, what is positive. Then what matters is that the institution that is involved, let's say the State Agency for Refugees, sees the benefit of this system, and then as a result of that keeps it afterwards, which, let's say, is happening to a limited extent also as a result of the integration evaluation tool project. But then there is another issue that is quite serious when it comes to integration in Bulgaria, and that is the lack of an institution that is responsible for the overall integration mechanism. So then, of course, immediately this brings the outcome of the project to a lower degree, since there is no institution that will take it up later. But I don't know whether you're aware, this integration evaluation tool project developed further in another EU project that is quite long. It's a 5-year project with the participation of 15 member states. It's called National Integration Evaluation Mechanism, or the NIEM project, and Bulgaria is also part of it. So even this can be seen as a result of the pilot that we did. Of course, we support the continuation, but our aim is always that whatever the product is, it is sustainable, and there is some institution, which is the responsible institution, that takes it up further. I can't hear you.
Sorry. As you were saying, as a part of the refugee integration in Bulgaria and working with institutions, another thing it mentions on the website is about lobbying authorities to develop these appropriate policies. What are some of the policies that you are advocating for?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so as I mentioned, advocacy and lobbying is our core activity. And when we speak about integration, it's a very difficult issue, and not just because it is difficult to define what integration means, but just because integration consists of a lot of sectors. For example, that would be education, but also housing, employment, social security, citizenship, family reunification, and so on and so forth. And in comparison to other protection areas where you have one leading institution like the State Agency for Refugees, or you have border police, or you have migration directorate, then when it comes to integration, we're talking about dozens of stakeholders. So that makes it more difficult, first of all, to advocate separately with each stakeholder. First of all, we need to identify, because there are many, many. Then you need to work with all of them, which is quite time consuming. Second, or thirdly, actually, we need to ensure the coordination between all of them. So we have set up different coordination mechanisms. Yeah, basically that's what defines the difficulty related to working on integration. Otherwise, if you're asking in which areas, these are the areas, like all the integration sectors that you can think of are part of our advocacy activities. We do not prioritize one integration sector over the other. We see where the gaps are, and then we advocate. And of course, there are some, let's say, easier wins and more difficult areas, but we can't really afford to choose out of them.
So more generally, broadening the scope to the tools that you use to implement that advocacy and your work in general. I was interviewing, as you talked about, your colleagues in the UNHCR representations in Northern Europe and Germany, and they were talking about how they use VR, virtual reality technology, to gain interest in the public for these issues and kind of have interactive simulations. What role does technology play in the work that you do, either in advocacy or in other sectors? And are there any technologies that you find specifically to have potential going into the future to help you?
Mm-hmm. Iva, would you like to start?
Yes, sure. Well, I mean, we can talk about two directions here. So on one hand, on raising awareness, and then technology is really of great help. And as an example, I can share our initiatives related. We had an online exhibition now for the World Refugee Day. It was a separate website where Bulgarian artists and refugee artists created an art project together, but it was a digital art project. And then it was presented online. And here I talk, for example, digital cards, or let's say architectural projects that can be described and presented in a digital way. So this was a very unique initiative for the first time, and we believe, considering also the COVID situation, it was really, really of great interest. 1 year ago, again, for the World Refugee Day, our office created an interactive exhibition where we had photos of refugees who live in Bulgaria, which get alive when you focus with your camera with a special application, and then they turn into a video and the people share their stories. So there are many, many creative ways which you can use in order to really bring the society into the shoes in the lives of refugees. On the other hand, of course, technology is very helpful when you want to reach out to the refugees themselves. And for example, right now we are piloting online survey to see the effects of the COVID crisis on refugees. So we are trying to find people that we probably don't know, also through the digital world. Yeah, and maybe Emmy can think of other examples. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, virtual reality. I know that our colleague who you had contact with initially has had such activities. There is some simulation game which uses virtual reality, and it also serves to raise awareness on the refugee issue. So if you become part of the game, you need to choose. Like there are different questions. Like if you are in this situation, what would you choose? Like for example, if you have to run away from your country, and you know there is this sea in front of you, will you take a boat, or will you stay behind, or maybe you go to the neighboring country, but it is not safe there either, and so on. And on the basis of the choice, then you end up in a different situation, and finally you kind of follow the footsteps of refugees. So we have done such activities, and usually they're more interesting for the general public than let's say the more traditional ways of expression of topics related to refugees. But of course, I wouldn't say that if we only go for new digital innovative technologies, that we will have to kind of give up the human contact, because it's not possible. I can also give you many examples of activities that do not have anything to do with any digitalization, but they are as much or even more effective when it comes to awareness raising. And just not to leave you hanging, to tell you about the human library, where refugees are like books, and then they tell their stories to some readers that are passers-by and are curious about what's going on. So some of them are really positively involved in the activity, and after that they may get interested in the refugee topics. So we have quite many examples like that. So yeah, digital technology is one area that our offices need to explore, and this is a must, but it's certainly not the only one, or even the priority one.
So going deeper into that informing people and telling the stories of refugees, the question I always ask is, and maybe both of you can answer this, in regard to informing people, what do you think that we as members of the public and also people in government doing their duties need to understand fundamentally and need to change in their view of refugees?
This brings me to the establishment of a refugee advisory board here in Bulgaria. This is a very recent initiative, and it is in line with the goals of the Global Compact on Refugees and the following Global Refugee Forum that took place last December. Part of the refugees who participated in the Global Refugee Forum basically participated in some of our meetings, and Anila Noor, if you have heard about her, she was one of them, and she said something that touched the very essence of your question. So basically she said that it is not enough to ask refugees to tell their stories, because most of the refugees, they do not see themselves as refugees. They don't want their exile to determine their identity, who they are. So if we want the public to understand what it is to be a refugee, then we need to show refugees in their expert light, because they are humans like every one of us, and they have their own expertise. So they can get the respect that we're looking for through their knowledge and what they can do. But in order for this to be possible, then we need to give them the space that they need to develop their expertise. So that means it's not enough just to invite a refugee to a forum to ask them to tell their story, what made them a refugee, but it is necessary to involve them, let's say, in the organization of the forum in the first place, in the determination of the topics that are going to be discussed, to consult them on recommendations on what we want to achieve out of different activities, or in short, to empower them in a meaningful way. So yes, what what we as offices of UNHCR need to understand in the first place is that if we want to be more effective, then we need to give space to refugees to advocate for themselves and for the community. Of course, that means that we need to ensure the representation of these refugee voices. And only after that, to show the public that being a refugee is an additional element, although a very important one, of a person's identity, but it's not the main thing. So if you see somebody through their expertise, it's a very different way that you take them compared to only if you know that they're refugees.
Yeah, that's I don't think I have much to add, but really to step on Emmy's words, it's really important to see in refugees not only problems and burden, but opportunities. And it's really stressing sometimes when you think, for example, Bulgaria is a country which has one of the fastest shrinking populations in the world. How it gives up the opportunity to use the people who are here, their skills, their expertise, only because the state or the authorities see somehow the presence of these people only as a source of problems and as a source of insecurity, let's say, because many of those people have had a life in their own countries. They used to have jobs, they used to have some kind of living, and these are skills which is really shameful not to be used. Also, not only for the benefit of the refugees themselves, but for the welcoming society. So in the moment really this shift is made, then really the energy also is shifted. And of course, this includes the empowerment of refugees, the space for the development of their skills, and the solving of really various issues. On one hand, related to basic needs and existence, but also on the other hand, of in space which is enough for them to think about their future plan, study, and publish businesses. And yeah, so that's the most important message, I believe.
And obviously, everything is not ideal and easy, but how many pushbacks have you faced to your efforts, either implicit or explicit, and what obstacles have you encountered?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we're talking about advocacy, and by default, we can't expect some quick wins because these are long-term processes. And as I said, it's a matter of prioritization. But then the question is, okay, if we just prioritize the areas where we expect to have some positive developments, does it mean that we will leave behind some more difficult areas, such as housing, for example, which are quite costly? But then again, housing is one of the most important prerequisites to integration. So if we talk about the different challenges that we have been facing in the past years and that we'll keep facing, one of them, of course, is coordination. And I already started to talk about it, because one can coordinate if there is a coordinating body. But if there isn't, then the question is who is the coordinator? And of course, UNHCR is taking that role, but in the absence of any government institution, which is a problem, because imagine like the most banal situation where we organize an event on refugee integration, and then we want to invite a main speaker, but we don't have anybody to invite because nobody has this responsibility. So coordination is one main gap. Then the other one is lack of funding. Bulgaria is a country with with economic difficulties, with a low standard of living. For the general population, which also means that these are the same circumstances that refugees coming to Bulgaria face. But that also means that if local authorities are responsible for integration, which they are on a local level, if they don't have enough funds, how are we expecting them to deliver? And of course, it's much easier to pilot different initiatives when there is the funding for them. Of course, as we always say, funding is not the most important prerequisite to take up an initiative, because some things do not cost anything, like to coordinate better, for example. But if you want to offer, let's say, shelter, you need money. Even if you want to start a platform where Bulgarian nationals share their willingness to shelter refugees, you still need some funds for that. You need also human resources for training and so on and so forth. So funding is the second issue. Then the third issue is the general negative attitudes towards asylum seekers and refugees. This is rooted in many areas of life. It's related to politics. It's related again to funding. It's related to lack of information. It's related to stereotypes and prejudice. And because it is so multifaceted, it is very difficult to tackle. And already we spoke of some ways to raise awareness. We also work with media. We organize some information sessions for them, to train them to make the right distinctions, to use the right terms. So yeah, this would be the third main challenge. And let me see if there are more. Yes, of course there are. So, for example, when we speak about different experts on the ground, there we come to the subjective factors, who has what motivation, what knowledge. So we provide some knowledge to them, but when it comes to motivation, how do you motivate them since they're working for another institution? So yes, there will always be challenges, and we are trying to overcome them in different ways. In some areas it's easier than in others, especially when it comes to money. But even when we're talking about funds, we assist different institutions to apply for funding, to the European Commission or to other sources, sometimes together with us. Other times we just disseminate information about possible funding sources, and so on and so forth. So let's say that we're trying to compensate for all these setbacks on a daily basis in our job. And if you can think of any other challenges, Ive?
Well, I think generally when it comes to advocacy work, at least for me personally, a challenge is that very often the amount of effort that you invest in something is really not that important. And sometimes you do something small and the effect is huge, or other times you invest days and months and years of advocacy and the result is like practically zero. And this is due to subjective factors and political will, which if it's missing, it's really, really complicated to overcome it. So somehow this imbalance is pretty frustrating for people who work on advocacy. But I believe in our office, we've learned to celebrate small wins and small steps, and they lead us to greater victories. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. And now we have one last question for you. So if young people are looking to enter this field, what sort of things should they be studying and working on when they are young to prepare them and inform them? What path did you guys take?
Yes, these are several questions. So if we have to advise young people what they should be doing if they want to be part of this, then I would say that they should focus on studying law, international relations, but also political science, and why not psychology or sociology. But this is not so much the question. Like, I believe that first of all we need to motivate them to want to become part of this field, and not the other way around. So we cannot presuppose that they already want to do it, and then because of that they will think of, oh, okay, what is the best discipline that will help me become part of it? No, it usually happens the other way around. So regardless of what they decide to study, if they have some exposure to refugee issues, if they meet somebody who is a refugee, or they join some volunteering activity that has something to do with refugees, then they may become curious about the field, get interested, and only after that get a better idea of what they could do and what knowledge they would need in order to be more effective and to build some expertise. So because of that, our office is working with academia, with students, to offer them different opportunities to get to know the field better, so that they can decide for themselves at an earlier stage if they would be interested to contribute to the field and develop themselves in this area, for which we also help at a later stage. Many organizations offer scholarships. We also work with interns. Sorry, not scholarship, but internships, because scholarships are different. So internships. We also work with interns. And I have to say that if the internship was positive in terms of the overall feeling, the contact between the intern and the other participants in the whole activity were positive, then the likelihood that this person will want to stay in the field is quite high. Whereas vice versa, if a person is doing an internship, but then nobody from the organization is interested in their work, or they don't pay attention to increasing the knowledge of the person, or they don't put an effort into introducing this young person to the core of the work, then we cannot expect that this person will want to stay in the field. So for me, the human touch is the most important element, and this is what we are trying to promote. The work is very difficult, as Iva mentioned. Sometimes it is not rewarding, but indeed, when you can help one or two people, even, you see the joy in their faces, this is enough to make you forget all the other instances where you have not managed to achieve, let's say, a more long-lasting impact.
Well, should I add something as well? I can share my personal experience because I remember the very first day when I thought about working with refugees. I was a journalist. I was writing international news, and I had a colleague who was in Afghanistan, and we were standing in front of the map of the world, and he said, well, look, this is Afghanistan, and this is the most amazing country where I've been, with the kindest, worst people living there, but suffering every day. And then I was like, oh my God, who are those people? And I realized that there are Afghan refugees in Bulgaria. So I went to the reception centers where I started volunteering. And at some point I realized that this time spent in the reception centers was actually more rewarding to me than my job. So I went on the Syrian border. I was a volunteer for a short period of time. Then I studied a new master's, which was related to human rights. And then, yeah, I applied for UNHCR. So it was a very, let's say, long-term decision that I took at some moment. But as Emi said, I don't think there is a need to limit oneself with the idea I have to study that, or that, because our field is so huge. You can be a lawyer, you can be a social worker, you can be a psychologist, you can work with logistics, you can write projects, you can do million things. You just have to find, I believe, the space where you can be of help and to feel useful. And if you have really the passion, then you'll find it.
Thank you.